stood and hastened to their infernal death. This man, who was the first that had ever escaped out of their hands, related to his neighbors what had happened and showed them the mangled body of his wife, which lay at a distance, the bloodthirsty wretches not having had time to carry it with them. They were all struck with astonishment and horror, took him with them to Glasgow, and reported the whole adventure to the chief magistrate of the city. Upon this intelligence, he wrote to the king, informing him of the matter. In a few days, his majesty in person, this is during the reign of James I, accompanied by 400 men, went in quest of the perpetrators of such cruelty. The man who had his wife murdered before his eyes went as their guide with a great number of bloodhounds, that no possible means might be left unattempted to discover the haunt of these execrable villains. They searched the woods, traversed, and examined the seashore, but though they passed by the entrance into their cave, they had no suspicion that any creature resided in that dark, dismal abode. Fortunately, however, some bloodhounds entered the cave, raised an uncommon barking and noise, indicated that they were about to seize their prey. The king and his men returned, but could scarcely conceive how any human being could reside in a place of utter darkness, and where the entrance was difficult and narrow. But as the bloodhounds increased in their vociferation and refusing to return, it occurred to all that the cave ought to be explored to its extremity. Accordingly, a sufficient number of torches were provided. The hounds were permitted to pursue their course. A great number of men penetrated through all the entrances of the path and at length arrived at the private residence of these horrible camels. Everybody's crying. They were followed by all the band, who were shocked to behold a sight unequaled in Scotland, if not in any part of the universe, with legs, arms, thighs, hands and feet of men, women, and children were suspended in rows like dried beef. Some limbs and other members were soaked in pickle, while a great mass of money, both of gold and silver, watches, rings, pistols, cloth, both woolen and linen, with an innumerable quantity of other articles, were either thrown together in heaps or suspended upon the sides of the cave. The whole brutal family of 50 sons were seized, the human flesh buried in the sand of the seashore, the immense booty carried away, and the king marched to Edinburgh with the prisoners. This new and wretched spectacle attracted the attention of the inhabitants, who flocked from all quarters to see this bloody and unnatural family as they passed along, which had increased in the space of 25 years to the number of 27 men and 21 women, and additional children. Arrived in the capital, they were all confined in the toll booth under a strong guard. They were next day conducted to the common place of execution and life war, executed without any formal trial, it being deemed unnecessary to try those who were avowed enemies of mankind and all social order. In other words, let's destroy the evidence, because if we have a trial, the whole world going to know we made take care of that. I mean, only black folks, the yellow people can be counted. Right? And etc. So that, one example. Now, this is called, it's a very fascinating, it's called the Newgate Calendar. Again, like most things out of print, and what it is full of a lot of cases, execution cases and others, that is tried over the period. And the Newgate Calendar, you can pass it around, Newgate Calendar. Newgate is a prison in England where they usually put the people, this is, like I said, you have to check without outsiders. But in any event, no, I don't collect the money, I'm the workhorse. The ladies, if you check for them, they'll get in the front. All right, well, I'll hold it here. Trust me, but you have to come up with $500,000. I'll give you credit. You have plastic. Now, you don't think? Let me just jump to this century. One of the people where we had a group in Eye of Peru, a study group in Detroit, where we've gone out and lectured. There, Mr. Abdul called me and told me he was up in Canada and visiting, which is right at Windsor, Canada, is right across, as you know, from Detroit. And he passed a record store, and they were featuring this recording by this so-called rock group. And he called me and said, Professor Ice, he says, 6 months ago I'd never heard of Sonny B until you came in and did this to it. And then he went on to tell me this rock group, called this white Canadian rock group, they call themselves Sonny B. Now this is something that happened in 1644. What does this tell you? Could you imagine anybody with these kind of cannibals that in other words, we will perpetuate their honor by naming a music team. But I started off by telling y'all this is an absurd society. All right? So this is the name in terms of what they have. One other point, you say, okay, that's antiquity. Let's move you down to 16. Right after that, we go down to the great Cromwell, whom everybody admires as the great commonist. And they tell you he died, but nobody tells you what they did to this man. After he died, after having cut off Charles I's head in England, the British people 3 years later said, oops, we made a mistake, we want the king back again. We want royalty back again. Now a whole lot of people had their heads chopped off, including the king. His son Charles was running around all over Europe trying to stay away from the English bloodhounds because if they caught him, his head was going to go to the same place as daddy. So the British Commonwealth sent an emissary to France to ask Charles to please come back. They wanted him to be their king. And Charles says, I need it in writing and did everything. You know where in the hell they're going to get me caught that challenge. The same way of my dad. But they finally got him in and Charles came back. Yes, he came back, they made him king, as we know, but then they had a problem. They wanted to show that they were not in favor of killing kings or regicide anymore. So Parliament, now the same Parliament that declared Charles I as being persona non grata, null and void, now decide, oops, we made a mistake, scratch that. We are now bringing back the king, and the dude that killed the king, who's responsible for this, was Oliver Cromwell, and he is now a criminal, and they charge him with regicide. But the problem is, Cromwell has been dead 3 years. That's right. No problem. Yes, ma'am. No problem. Parliament decided, dig him up. And they found him guilty, sentenced him to be executed, but in order to do that, once again, you got to dig him up. Now, so what they do, they took this body, and they go down to Cornwall, which is one extreme of England, and they march the body, grave crossing or fluttering in the breeze, through every town from Cornwall up to London, and they go through the center of the town and they streets, and people knew they were coming, and they're throwing rotten eggs and stuff out the window on this corpse. The same people who were saying, yeah, Cromwell, a few years ago, throwing it on the corpse. Finally, what did I say? Finally, when they reached the Tower of London, at that point, they carried out the last part of the execution, which of course was the decapitation of what was left. Cut off the residue or the remnant of the head and stuck it on one of the sharp pikes over the gates of the London Tower of London. That's right. And of course, the clothes that were eaten, and that head, that skull, lasted there for 70 years, they say. Now, legend comes up, but at least 50 years before it finally disintegrated. And people used to go by and steal a little piece of it and all this. Okay? Now, I've just given you a whirlwind tour. None of this involved you and I. Now, let me tie this one thing with you. Let's bring us into the picture. 1798. A slaver ship leaves the motherland, as was later testified, with about 400 souls. We get out in the first part of the Middle Passage. Some kind of epidemic, because British broke out aboard ship among the involuntary passengers. The captain made the decision that in order to save the ship, to do what? To jettison the involuntary passengers, which is us. Throw them overboard. We don't know the exact figure because figure's there, but over 200 people were down the plank. Now, you're Africans, and I don't know why y'all don't want to be called Africans. They're very honorable name. We're very survivors. Now, you're not going to believe what happened. One dude managed to survive. He hung on to a rope underneath the ship. That's right. He hung on to this rope, and that came out in the trial, as these people tell you. Read Leon Hickenbottom's first book on In the Matter of Color. It is documented in there. This case. Now, for what happens when they get to Jamaica, which was the destination, this man met some people from his clan, and they said, hey, if you can get in, they got him, how this is, because they had their own, we had our own underground, so not too many people know. You had an underground in the island, but just like you had, going from here through Maryland and Harry Tubman. But in any event, this man eventually got to England. So obviously what must have happened at night? He possibly got aboard ship, somebody gave him some food. But anyway, because this is a trip of some 3 months from the motherland. But he ends up in England, and he gets to see Charles James Fox and William Wilberforce. These are the people who were instrumental in trying to stop the African slave trade. And he had a job convincing them that his story was true. They checked it out and it was. Now, who was it that made their money insuring involuntary cargo? Lloyd's of London. That's how they made their name. They had insured the cargo. So now the issue wasn't even about murder. The issue was Lloyd's of London does not want to pay the insurance because they say, but when you threw these people off, this was murder. And we are not, one of the clauses in the contract saying we don't have to pay you to be murdered because murder is a crime. The owners of the ship, the gentleman adventurer, says no, this was the necessary action. So it goes to admiralty. The question then, of course, is, were these Africans human beings or were they cargo? If human beings, Lloyd's of London would not be liable. The people on the ship that owned the company would be also liable for criminal prosecution. If they were indeed cargo, then the company that owned the ship and the involuntary cargo would be exonerated and Lloyd's of London would have to pay off the insurance. Now, I could leave y'all with a puzzler. You want 20 guesses as to how? No, Lloyd's had to pay. 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 Yes. Lloyd's had to pay. Now, when we come one level down, one of the things that I have not spoken on, and we need to do 3 or 4 lectures on that since so little of it has been talked. I mentioned it on the radio interview the other day. This book, Colonists in Bondage. White servitude and convict labor in America from 1667, during the same time, back to 1776. The cutoff date, of course, has to be 1776, because that was the date the so-called American Revolution was successful. England could no longer dump its unwanted people on here, and that's what caused all of them crackers in Australia. Between 17 and 1778, when the first convict ship landed in Australia, to 1868 when they stopped, pretty close to 600 million people were transported from England to Australia. 600 million. I'm sorry, 600,000. Now, when you allow for the, and of course, again, sound familiar? The majority of them are poor Irish who got sent away from milking cows or stealing watermelons or whatever it was in order to try to survive. Allow me to borrow this for a minute so you can get it back. What I want to give to you, this book is out of print, you may find it. It's by Albert Emerson Smith. Now, and again, I take you all the way into the documentation. It takes a little longer, but I'd rather do this so you know the source. Now, in here, Smith did this. This was his doctoral dissertation, 1947. Published originally by the University of North Carolina Press. What was the last price they were quoting for this book available for authors? $90. $90. Yes, any kind of condition. $90. And the guy said the cover's falling apart, but that's how rare it is. W.W. Norton brought out this paper back in 1967. Y'all see how I'm patching and trying to hold up. But I would like to share with you, again, we're talking about their inhumanity. Now, look at this. Right here, Maryland. Go and look in your Maryland state history and see how much of this you can find. The servant in the plantation. This is what they would do to you when they brought you here, either as a convict slave. They were not an indentured servant garbage. These were slaves as well. They put them in the field. The only way they stopped was because these white slaves started, and this happened in the West Indies too, these white slaves started making common cause they should have with the African folk. and having these uprisings, which meant that it became a threat to this absurd system. So they had to reluctantly give a few more privileges, if that's the word, to their European counterpart black. For example, now you say, well, how did they notice that? What they did, Virginia, Maryland, South Carolina, the way they did the whites, they marked them. So you could tell who was a piece of property and who was not. Now, so you say, what happens if you served your time and became free? Well, then they gave you freedom papers. And people, because once anybody saw the mark, you were forever being stopped. These people ran away the same as we did. Now let's look at some of the things that Mr. Emerson found out by going to the stationer's office in England. He looked at the record. Some of it you still find over there in Washington or in, what's your capital, Annapolis? Yeah. All right. Now, here's what he said. When a servant ran away, early laws provided for the pursuit of such servants by hue and cry, thus depending upon the ancient obligations of Anglo-Saxons to ensure recovery. Since in every colony this proved inadequate, new acts directed the public official to pursue at public expense, pressing into service men, boats, and whatever assistance might be necessary. But the most effective method was simply that of offering a reward to anyone who brought a runaway servant or convict back. Again, we're not talking about folks in this room. Or lodge him in a jail whence he could be procured by his master. Note the term, master. All this is going on, children, at the same time they're bringing us over here from Africa. Okay? Now, sheriffs were granted so much a mile for bringing back our runaway servants. And in the 18th century, reward for those taking up runaways eventually became fixed amount, 20 shillings in South Carolina, 200 pounds of tobacco in Virginia and Maryland, 15 shillings in Jersey, and so on. Some colonies provided that runaways once caught should be returned by passing them from constable to constable until they reach home, as was done in England with roads. When a servant was picked up by the authorities for traveling without a pass, no, this is not South Africa, this is here, right here. Well, that's the culture. Right. It's not different because they haven't changed. This is my whole thing. All right? Right. Then they would say, without a pass, and refused to tell who his master was, the sheriff might take him to jail and keep him there for an indefinite time until the master claims him. If no master appeared, the sheriff was authorized after a suitable time to sell the servant at auction to pay his jail fees. On several occasions, a runaway servant was incarcerated and his master refused to take him back, whereupon the magistrate usually instructed the sheriff, sell him. Where's that history? In your standard textbook. And you're walking around with a doctorate and saying, I'm educated. Come on. We're educated in what they want us to do. Now, let's look at the one other thing quickly, because we want to wind this down. I know you get the rest of this. Look at one other thing quickly. This business of passing the runaway once caught from sheriff to sheriff. Now watch this. Suppose you ran away from H Street, and you got all the way to Connecticut. And they catch you in Connecticut. I don't know how many counties in Connecticut, or how many in New York, or how many in New Jersey, or et cetera, you get to Maryland. So, every sheriff to take you to the county line, pass you off. Now he's going to pay the charges, and so on. So you're going to be passed through about at least 50 counties before you reach your home county here in Wellington on 8th Street. Now that's a lot of money. Who's going to pay that money? For that fee of catching and transport, who's going to pay that money? You are. That's right. That's right. That's right. Because let's say you're doing 10 years. Got the picture? So they say, okay, you got to pay every penny. You're liable for every penny that has cost us to get you back, plus the penalty, plus convicted for running away. So you now might get to have a fine on you of $10,000. How much do you earn a week? Nada. So how do you pay that fine? Extra time. Extra time? Let me give you a case of Anne Arundel. Do y'all know where that's in Maryland? All right? Okay, get it. All right. Listen to this, right? Now, the same procedure was followed in Maryland and Virginia, with the changes made necessary by different laws. It may be remarked that the Maryland law allowed the magistrates some discretion in adjudging 10 days of service for each day of absence by the servant. So you also got to give extra service time, 10 to 1, among all other penalties. Now, Dr. Smith found a case right here among your neighbors, and I'll give you this. Yes, that's correct. They always follow the prescribed the full penalty, unless the servant had been away for so long that his time was thereby hopelessly extended. Which means what? Slavery life. And Dr. Emerson Smith goes to say, the courts always seem to have accepted the word of the master for the length of time that the servant had been away. Though the servant was present in court, and the entries occasionally indicate that, quote, he had nothing to say for himself. Usually the unhappy victim was silent. And Smith goes on to say, and I have never come across a successful protest by a servant against one of these judges in court. Bear in mind, these are white folks we're talking. There were many abuses. A case from the Anne Arundel records illustrates a highly unpleasant mode of procedure. Here, a white maidservant was brought to court in March of 1719 with 133 days of absence claimed against her. Beginning with 4 days, then, you ready for this, 1714. This is when 5 years later. He brings her to court. Now, why does he bring her to court? What had happened was that her master had kept an account as the years went by of various short absences. In other words, the woman never ran away. He would call Mary, and if she didn't answer, he'd march down, she's away without my sister. Now, she doesn't know that he's doing that. All right? Now, she was serving like 7 years. She's supposed to give service and then on her own. Now, he kept an account as the years went by of various short absences, and as she approached the end of her 5-year term, he brought her to court, produced a tabulation of all these small delinquencies, and was actually awarded 1,330 days of extra service. The unfortunate woman stood in the court and, quote, says she has nothing to say against the said account, quote. Smith says it may have been a true account, but obviously she would have had an impossible task to prove it, that it was not. And with her habits being what they apparently were, she had no chance of ever becoming free unless the courts in Maryland became more merciful than Maryland courts generally were.
Between that and the so-called criminal justice.
Precisely. Precisely. Right. And one other little section here, they tell you as background for this, how they got these white folks here. Besides convict, kidnap, don't tell them, forget that pilgrim and all that garbage. You know, that's the cover again. That's the magician back there putting the $20,000 out of. That's not the real deal, as y'all say. Right? They did it kidnapping, spiriting, registered offensive, and they tell you on a chapter here on rogues and vagabond, anybody they decided that didn't have no power or had nobody to protect them. And he tells you here in, on page part 2, penal transportation. You see, all these folks don't have no penal ancestors, no felons, accused felons. Convict transportation to 1718. I'm just going to read you this one small passage. The increase, and see if you see certain familiarities here. The increase in England of thieves, robbers, and other criminals was one of the consequences of those changes which substituted a mercantile for an agricultural economy and widened the gap between rich and poor. Crimes had been committed during the Middle Ages, of course, and since the 12th century the king had set out his justices to detect criminals and punish them with all the authority of royal power. But crime as a social problem did not exist until great numbers of poor people had been turned away from their manorial or agricultural occupation on the land, occupation, and set adrift in a society which was learning to disclaim responsibility for their support. No welfare. Huh? Okay. Now this is 300 years ago. What has changed? Right? They swarm through the cities. That's us. Huh? Idle, masterless, unwanted persons, and they live by whatever wretched devices they could invent. These are the honorable white folks who will never do nothing wrong. Okay? Now, inevitably, many of them stole and robbed. Respectable contemporaries viewed them with alarm and endeavored to suppress them by a brutal code of punishments which were intended to act as deterrents. What else is new? Has it changed or has it ever changed? We're going through this. Congress today, as we speak, getting ready to argue the same dumb stuff. Right. Because their education has been missed at any rate, right? Now this is people in the 18th century reacting in a certain way from the same kind of stimulus. But there ain't no place you can send people now. All the land on the earth is now occupied. Yes, there is no more Australia. There's no more, I'm saying, you no more land for you to rob from anybody to dump your unwanted people. That's why those of us who are African have to be very careful, because they want it all. Alright? Now, listen how they did it. The penalty of death was prescribed by law for all felonies, and a judge was allowed no discretion in imposing this penalty upon persons doing citizens. Mandatory citizens. Okay, hey, you picked it, not me. Mandatory citizens. Hence, the definition of what constituted a felony was a peculiar interest to the criminal classes. The difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Or what they did do with the criminal code for this city. Same thing. Same people. Same culture. All right. And it was by enlarging this group of offenses that Parliament undertook to deal with the problem of maintaining, ready for this, law and order. This is the beginning of the 18th century. I'm talking about this ain't yesterday. Right. During the 17th century, some 300 crimes were designated as felonies. And from the fact that housebreaking or burglary or stealing anything of value greater than 20 cents was thus made punishable by death. That's right. The severity of the code may be estimated. Thousands of persons, most of whom were guilty of what we should consider almost negligible crimes, were condemned to the gallows. And we have an example of one of your famous gentlemen from your neighbor state, Pennsylvania, in his book, the publication, Poor Richard Almanac, Benjamin Franklin, who once proposed that to show their appreciation to Mother England for sending all of these criminal convicts, dumping them here, that the least that the American colonists could do was shipped back to England about 3 shiploads of rattlesnakes in appreciation. So that tells you that the behavior pattern of these people did not really change based on their here every day. Now let's just dump this on your heart. The descendants of these people are now talking about the criminal, you know who, inherited criminal.
So-called
Now, let's, this one thing of Mother Bush that you might find, I got a couple of copies out there you may think. Charles Dickens, American Notes. Nobody, they show you A Christmas Carol, Great Expectation, Oliver Twist and all that, Nicholas Nickleby, and these are great book reading, but nobody ever does a documentary on Charles Dickens' American Notes, a journal of a few years that he spent traveling in the United States in the 1840s, basically Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, etc., and what he saw. And he tells us, the wonderful master, he talks in here about advertisements that he read in the daily newspapers about masters, quote, trying to recover their runaway African property. And he says this, an interesting law case. An interesting law case is now on trial, that was 1843, before in the Supreme Court arising out of the following facts. A gentleman residing in Maryland had allowed an aged pair of his African slaves substantial, though not legal, freedom for several years. While thus living, a daughter was born to them, who grew up in the same liberty until she married a free Negro and went to reside with him in Pennsylvania. They had several children and lived unmolested until the original owner died, when his heir attempted to regain them. But the magistrate before whom they were brought decided that he had no jurisdiction in the case. The owner seized the woman and her children in the night and carried them off to Maryland. Right? Law and order. Okay? And now he goes on to say, and these are ads in the newspapers at that time. Cash for Negroes, cash for Negroes, cash for Negroes is the heading of advertisements and great capitals down the long columns of the crowded journals. Woodcuts of a runaway Negro with manacled hands, crouching beneath a bluff pursuer in top boots, who having caught him, grasped him by the throat. Agreeably diversify the pleasant text. The leading article protests against that abominable and hellish doctrine of abolition, which is repugnant alike to every law of God and nature. Can't have these Africans running around free. Okay? Now, then he goes on to say, the Negroes, big and little, are not protected by public. They say the Negroes are protected by public opinion. Remember Mr. Sonny Bean? Now, here's what Dickens says. Let us try this public opinion by another test, which is important in 3 points of view. First, as showing how desperately timid of the public opinion slave owners are in their delicate descriptions of fugitive slaves and widely circulated newspapers. Secondly, as showing how perfectly contented the slaves are. Isn't that what Mr. Hammond tells us? Right? And how very seldom they run away. Thirdly, as exhibiting their entire freedom from scar or blemish or any mark of cruel infliction, as their pictures are drawn not by lying abolitionists, but by their own truthful masters. The following are a few specimens of the advertisements in the public papers. It is only 4 years since that the oldest among them appeared, and others of the same nature continue to be published every day in shows. And he goes on to quote, advertisement for the recaptured ancestor. Ran away, the negress Carolyn. I put a collar on her neck with one prong turned out. This is the master advertising for the return of his human property. Another one reads, ran away, a black woman, Betsy, had an iron bar on her right leg. Ran away, the Negro Manuel, much marked by my irons. Ran away, the negress Fanny, had on an iron band about her neck. Ran away, a Negro boy about 12 years old, had around his neck a chain dog collar with the Lampert engraved on it. These, mind you, are from advertisements in the daily newspapers this period. Nobody mentioned cannibal ran away. If you find them, be careful because they're going to eat you. Right? Ran away. The Negro hound, H-O-W-N, has a ring of iron on his left foot. Also Greaser, his wife. What did we do during slavery? The man and his wife doing what? Voting for freedom with their feet.
That's right.
Both of them left. And she has a ring and a chain on her left leg. Now listen what this scripture is, people, y'all. He has an iron ring on his left foot. His wife got a ring and chain on her left leg. Now you got to admit, it don't take much imagination to see that these people are going to be running with some considerable handicap. But still, damn it, they're trying. Now, can you give any more evidence of that? Obviously, he's a contented slave. Right? Okay? Committed to jail. A man who calls his name John. He has a clog of iron on his right foot, which weighs about 4 or 5 pounds. Even with that weight, John took off. Now, who's saying this? Not propagandists. These are the owners describing their property. You got to think it's happy because they want to get them back. Okay? Detained at the police jail, the Negro wench, Myra, has several marks of lashing and has iron on her feet. Ran away, a Negro woman and 2 children. Listen to this. A few days before she went off, I burnt her with a hot iron. On the left side of her face, I tried to make the letter M. You tell me about genocide and Holocaust?
Thank you.
Huh? But you got to scream. Yeah. Ran away. A Negro man named Henry. His left eye is out. Some scars from a knife under his left arm. And much scarred with the whip. Now, I'm not making any of that. These are direct quotations from the owners of these people. Our people. We do them a dishonor, children, when we say they have nothing to do with it. All right? Okay? $100 reward for a Negro fella Pumpy. 40 years old, he is branded on the left jaw. Committed to jail, a Negro man has no toes on the left foot. But he's still trying to get the hell away. Huh? With 1 foot and a half, he's still trying to get away. No toes on the left foot. Now listen to this. Ran away. A Negro woman named Rachel has lost all of her toes except the large one. So she ain't got but 1 toe. 9 of them is bye-bye baby. But she's still floating her feet. All right? Now, ran away. Give me the courtesy, give these folks the courtesy of just something to finish for you because some people back might not be able to hear. Ran away, Sam. He was shot a short time since through the hand and has several shots in his left arm and side. Now these wounds ain't healed yet. This man, these wounds are still healing. This guy's hitting. Right? Ran away. My Negro man, Dennis. Said Negro has been shot in the left arm between the shoulder and elbow, which has paralyzed the left hand. In other words, in effect, this man's got a stroke. And what is he out there doing? Ran away. My Negro man named Simon. He has been shot badly in his back and right arm. Ran away. A Negro named Arthur has a considerable scar across his breast and each arm made by my knife. He loves to talk much of the goodness of God. $25 reward for my man Isaac. He has a scar on his forehead caused by a blow and one on his back made by a shot from my pistol. Ran away a Negro girl named Mary. Small scar over her eye. A good many teeth knocked out. The letter A is branded on her cheek and forehead. Ran away the Negro Ben has a scar on his right hand, his thumb and forefinger being injured by being shot last fall. A part of the bone came out. He has also 1 or 2 large scars on his back and hips. Detained at the jail, a mulatto named Tom. One of them Tom's father and mother was. Has a scar on the right cheek and appears to have been burned with powder on the face. Ran away, a Negro man named Ned. 3 of his fingers are drawn into the palm of his hand by a cut. Has a scar on the back of his neck, nearly half the way around, done by ETTE. The following Negroes. Randall has 1 ear cropped off. Bob, 1 eye out. Kentucky Tom has 1 jaw broken. And what is this argument about what we did? We didn't put up no as I said at the beginning, it's an argument. Yeah, right. Now, ran away, a Negro woman named Maria has a scar on one side of her cheek by a cut and scars from a whip on her back. Ran away, the mulatto wench, Mary, has a cut on the left arm, a scar on the left shoulder, and 2 upper teeth knocked out. And then Dickens goes on to say, by way of explanation, I should say perhaps an explanation of this latter piece of description, that among the other blessings which public opinion secures to the Negroes is the common practice of violently punching out their teeth. I think we had an example of a cop that did this. I said just in one. Now, to make them wear iron collars by day and night, and to worry them with dogs are practices almost too ordinary to deserve mention. That's Dickens in the aside. And he goes on. Ran away, my man Fountain. Holes cut in his ears. A scar on the right side of his forehead. Has been shot in the hands, parts of his legs, and is marked on the back by the whip. $250 reward for my Negro man, Jim. He is much marked with shot in his right thigh. The shot entered on the outside halfway between the hip and knee bones. Brought to jail. John, his left ear cropped. Taken up, a Negro man, is very much scarred about the face and body and has his left ear cut off. Ran away, a Negro girl named Mary, scar on her cheek and the end of one of her toes cut off. Ran away, my mulatto woman Judy, she has had her right arm broken. Ran away, my Negro man Levi, his left hand has been burnt and I think the end of his forefinger is off. Ran away, a Negro man named Washington has lost part of his middle finger and the end of his little finger. $25 reward for my man John. The tip of his nose has been bitten off. $25 reward for the Negro slave Sally. Walks as though she is crippled in the back. Joe Dennis ran away. Notches in his ear. Negro boy Jack. Small crop out of his left ear. Negro man Ivory. Small piece cut out of the tip of each ear. And he says again, while I'm on the subject of ears, this is Dickens again, I may observe that a distinguished abolitionist in New York once received a Negro's ear, which had been cut off close to the head in a general post office letter. It was forwarded by the free and independent gentleman who had caused it to be amputated with a polite request that he would place the specimen in his collection. He said, I could enlarge this catalog with broken arms and broken legs and gashed flesh and missing teeth and lacerated blacks and bites of dogs, brands of red-hot irons, innumerable. But as my readers will be sufficiently sickened and repelled already, I'll return to another branch of the subject. There's another section here which we will deal with at a later date. The gratuitous cruelty of our soldiers fighting in the Civil War, military disaster, where the federal, they put them in at the Battle of Petersburg, not too far away. and they put black troops in 2 regiments with no training to try to storm a fort. And the fort was blown up from the bottom, and they were caught in a crater.
That's right.
And as they were sliding down the crater, Packers just came up and shot them, slaughtered them like fish in a bowl. And they said, it's not a crime because there's no such thing as a black soldier. We treat them all as slaves. You take up arms against a white man, we catch you, you are dead. The rules of war do not apply. Now what's this I hear? If you ever get a chance, I didn't bring it with me, but there's one book that all of you should read. And that is Army Life in the Black Regiment by Thomas Whitworth Higginson, which is the story of the 1st South Carolina Volunteer Regiment in the Civil War. It must be in one of your libraries, I believe. Army Life in the Black Regiment. Thomas Whitworth Higginson, who was the colonel of Higginson. Higginson, Higginson. And there you have in your own words why these people fought. The United States Army, all soldiers signing up, soldiers' pay was $13 per month. They decided that the white soldiers wouldn't fight. I'm talking the federal army. The black soldiers got the same rate of pay. So the army over here at headquarters said we'll only pay black soldiers $9 to keep the white soldiers from being dissatisfied. Now nobody ever figured out to ever explain to me how a bullet said, oh, this is a $9 soldier, so I curve around him. But the interesting thing is they reneged on that. Most of these folks never got paid. Never got paid. Higginson spent the rest of his life, he lived until 1901, trying to get justice for his men, writing letters and such. And he wasn't without some power. He came out of, New England aristocracy. But he never got paid. But the guys said, we're not fighting for money. We're fighting for the freedom of ourselves and our family. And it's not fair what the federal government's doing to us. But if we lose this war, so these white soldiers, they lose, they go back home, they shake hands, they're friends. But if we lose this war, it's all over for African people in this country. So we have to win or die. Now, last piece, and then y'all can be on your way. I'm getting tired of too old to be doing this. So there's some stuff here that deals with some of the gratuitous cruelty we've done to our people. But I want to share with you another document from William Tecumseh Sherman, the gentleman who marched through Georgia. And what I have here in my hands is a copy of his. Yes.
I just have a quick question.
Can I finish this?
Okay.
I'll give you time for questions.
Okay.
But if you stop me like this, now I'm gone because I'm sitting out.
Okay.
And you're going to be first. As soon as I finish this gives you the story of where the myth of the 40 acres on the mule came from. William Tecumseh Sherman was basically no friend of ours, but he was a military pragmatist. And as they marched through Georgia, a whole lot of refugees and our folks were following the army, trying to get away from the rest. Many people asked him, let us join up. We'll carry wood. We'll do anything to help beat these damn secessionists. Sherman did not want this because he felt it would happen. He wrote to Mr. Maafa, remember him, our good friend, about what to do about all these people. Something had to be done because most of their husbands was fighting in the army. Nothing came from Washington, so what Sherman did, in order to deal with the problem of destitution among former slaves and people, he issued a 1865 his Special Orders number 15. And this was the beginning of a whole lot of misinformation, as usual. The usual rumors make their rounds. he issued, here we are, page 250. Special Field Orders number 15. Headquarters, Military Division of the Mississippi. In the field, Savannah, Georgia, January 16, 1865. This is Sherman's field order. The island, 1. The islands from Charleston south, the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles inland, and the country bordering the St. Johns River in Florida are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States. 2. At Beaufort, Hilton Head, Savannah, Fernandina, St. Augustine, and Jacksonville, the blacks may remain in their chosen or accustomed vocation, but on the island and in the settlements hereafter to be established, no white person whatever, unless military officers and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside, and the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the free people themselves, subject only to United States military authority and the acts of Congress. By the laws of war and orders of the President of the United States, the Negro is free and must be dealt with as such. He cannot be subjected to conscription or forced military service, save by the written orders of the highest military authority department and under such regulations as the President or Congress may prescribe. Domestic service, blacksmiths, carpenters, and other mechanics will be free to select their own work and residence, but the young and able-bodied Negroes must be encouraged to enlist as soldiers in the service of the United States to contribute their share toward maintaining their own freedom and securing their rights as citizens of the United States. Negroes so enlisted will be organized into companies, battalions, and regiments under the orders of the United States military authorities and will be paid, fed, and clothed according to law. The bounties paid on enlistment may, with the consent of the recruit, go to assist his family and settlement in procuring agricultural implements, seeds, tools, boots, and clothing, and other articles necessary for their livelihood. Whenever 3 respectable Negroes, heads of families, shall desire to settle on land and have selected for their purpose an island or locality defined within the limits shown above designated, the inspector of settlements and plantations will himself, or by such subordinate officer as he may appoint, give them a license to settle such islands or districts and afford them such assistance as he can to enable them to establish a peaceable agricultural settlement. The 3 parties named will subdivide the land under the supervision of the inspector among themselves and such others as may choose to settle near them, so that each family shall have a plot not more than 40 acres of tillable land. And when its borders on some water channel with not more than 800 feet of waterfront, in the possession of which land the military authorities will afford them protection until such time as they can protect themselves or until Congress shall regulate their title. The quartermaster may, on the requisition of the inspector of settlement and plantation, place at the disposal of the inspector 1 or more of the captured steamers to ply between the settlements and 1 or more of the commercial points heretofore named, in order to afford the settlers the opportunity to supply their necessary wants and to sell the products, etc., etc. Whenever a Negro has enlisted in the military service of the United States, he may locate his family in any one of the settlements at pleasure and acquire a homestead and all other rights and privileges of a settler as though present in person. In like manner, Negroes may settle their families and engage on board the gunboats or in fishing or in the navigation of the inland waters without losing any claim to land or other advantages derived from this system. But no one, unless an actual settler as above defined, or unless absent on government service, will be entitled to claim any right to land or property in any settlement by virtue of these orders. And then he goes on to how what's the procedure administrative that this will be carried out. And it says, by order of Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, etc. as the full name. Now,
The title of the book.
I said, the memoirs of William Tecumseh Sherman. I think about 10 years ago they republished it. But for this section alone, there's another bit in there. Now we're talking here 1865. He got a letter when the Secretary of War Staten came down and said, there's a rumor that people are not being well treated by you and they want to have say in their own land. Now mind you, this is us just coming out of slavery. Staten said, I want to have a meeting with some of the folks who represent the African people in this community. What they say. Now we've heard all the other things about you other things. So they brought in 20 African men. And Sherman addressed them, asked them certain questions. Now this ought to, I hope it stimulates you, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I'm going to read from you just one of the questions. How our thinking was, remember I told you early on, we're not as crazy as we thought. One of the questions, and I'm not going to go through because Sherman gives you title of the question that he was asked. Let's come on, man. Don't fool me now. 15. Fourth question of Secretary Staten to the Speaker of this group of black representatives. Listen to the second question. State what you understand by slavery and the freedom that was to be given by the President's proclamation. Answer. Slavery is receiving by irresistible power the work of another man and not by his consent. The freedom, as I understand it, promised by the proclamation, is taking us from under the yoke of bondage and placing us where we can reap the fruit of our own labor and take care of ourselves and assist the government in maintaining our freedom. Now, crucial question. Fourth question. State in what manner you would rather live, whether scattered among the whites or in colonies by yourself. Remember, this is January 1865. Answer. Yeah, but that's your opinion. You don't know what they're from. Let's see what they're from. Answer. I would prefer to live by ourselves.
Thank you.
For there is a prejudice against us in the South that will take years to get over, if ever. But I do not know that I can speak for my brother. And then they say here parenthetically, all but Mr. Lynch, who was a missionary from the North, agreed with Frazier. They wanted to live separately away from these people, and then they go on to say, because there's no way that we're going to live together in peace. Yeah. But Mr. Frazier said, oh yeah, I think that they can learn to live together.
No way.
But these people, mind you, who have just come out from under the gun, understood clearly. Yeah. Let's go away and do this. Now you might well ask. I read you the special Field Order 15. How many of you have read this before or knew about it? Now, would you want to know if that was the case, then what happened to it? In due course, he sent a copy to the White House. Our great good friend Mackey, who took one look at this order and hit decision. What the hell you think now? We're not giving away crackers land, the white people's land to these niggas. Now mind you, the so-called owners of the land, Mr. Hammond and them, had taken off for parts unknown. Because the federal gunboats control all of the East Coast. All the farming that was still done on these plantations, guess who kept running the farm?
The black folks.
I told you, sir, it's just exactly.
Because they thought the whites had farming first.
Right? And here is Sherman, who comes up, not a friend of us, but a pragmatic gentleman, says something's got to be done to give these people stop. Now they're fighting in the army. This is only fair. You've got this land here. These folks who had it rose up in arms against the government, and when they lost, they're gone. Yeah, they gone. Ain't nobody on the land. If Lincoln would have said, come on back and get your land, he couldn't have found nobody. There was 4 inlands they could get. The only folks, again, keeping the land going, milking the cows every day, hay in the field, whatnot, is us. What else are we going to do? We're farmers. Now this man says, give these people a chance, and Abraham Lincoln, post haste, rescinded that order. Naturally, when he was assassinated, and Andrew Johnson, of course, took over all the other things, but there never was, just to say parenthetically, as a sidebar, there never was any sort of Reconstruction period. That's a propaganda term. That so-called 12 years, we never had it. You can't say it was Reconstruction during the same period when these southern states were passing black codes and all the rest of it, and you just lost the war. Now, sir, you had a question.
Yeah, I just remembered when you read the passage about reducing the salary of the black soldiers from 13. That was depicted in the film Glory. And there was a scene in the film where they showed them actually receiving the checks. And when they got the news that it was reduced, they tore the checks up.
Well, yeah.